at the time of the allegations of the insurrection, that it seemed wrong. Having the National Guard surrounding the Capitol building felt wrong. The imprisonment of the January 6th, as they call them, prisoners now, still, even going on 4 years, doesn't feel like America anymore. What the heck is happening?
Well, I think a lot of people remember that event, and they kind of under their breath called it the Reichstag fire. And there was a whole lot to that event that just didn't add up outside the media. So if you were here, or when I lived in D.C. area, you could tell that there was something off between what they're saying and what was actually going on. I think that I hear a lot of talk about, especially politicians talk about saving our democracy. And I tend to think sometimes when they say save our democracy, recognizing the word democracy really relates, is closer to what Marxists use the word democracy, that they mean save our revolution. And maybe the revolution that was a color revolution in 2020. I'm not going to say the government was overthrown by a Marxist revolution in 2020, but you could certainly make the argument that it certainly looks like that. And you could certainly see that since then, people's understanding of their own fundamental liberties have been seriously impinged. And people are looking at this and understanding that what's going on in the gender world and all this is a direct attack on people's actual rights as citizens and as individuals.
How about looking online to try to find information to share with others about factual events that they know happened and it can't be found anymore?
I think what people have to realize is that disappearing information is very real. Whole pieces are gone in the internet that never disappears, right? And I think there's a philosopher who wrote a book, Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power, Joseph Piper. And he talked about people getting lost in countless superficial information bits, noisily and breathlessly swirling around. And I think that what we really need to start thinking about is the fact that we don't need as much information as we think. And sometimes the pursuit of data comes at the cost of discerning the data we can actually take in. And people need to start discerning what they're seeing. Where can people go? I tend to think that I like to jump around from places because I think any place that you get comfortable, you end up being in a situation where you're going to a news service that's providing you what they want you to know. And sometimes it's good to, my answer would be maybe not the one you're looking for, but people should decide where they go and get information and not be passive receptacles of information from people they trust. Because at any given time, any constant news service has a narrative, as an editorial line that always goes to the mean. And stop making your understanding of world events dependent on media that basically is governed by profitability curves and demographic research on who they think their audience is and what they need to feed them to keep them going.
But if you turn on late night talk and hear the Oscars are on today and Jimmy Kimmel is the host, all three major network late night talk shows have been dominated since the Trump administration by alienating half the audience by being propaganda arms of the Democrat Party.
Well, I think I would be part of that alienated group. I just don't even think they're funny anymore. I think they overtly propagandize, and I think for the people who see that, I think those talk show hosts, they think that we're just stupid and we're not understanding the message. I think we understand the message. We don't want to be propagandized to. We understand completely what's going on. But I think you basically asked the question that raises the question that at what point did our national media news services become conduits for propaganda in the manner in which they do, so that no matter where you go, no matter what entertainment you see, even the movies you go to are completely infused with narratives that are costing them their profitability because nobody wants to see it. So I think that the question about these evening shows, talking about the Academy Awards, until someone told me today they were today, I didn't know that because I tuned them out a long time ago, because I think the average person knows they cease to be relevant to their lives. They make decisions that have nothing to do with whether a movie's actually good, and I understand some people have different opinions of that, but I think everybody understands what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. They're made by, half the time these actors are not the smartest apples in the world, taking high political positions and ruining what may be a good movie to put their narratives in there, and people don't want to be preached to. So I don't watch the Academy Awards. Is it the Emmys or Academy Awards?
It's the Academy, the Oscars.
Oscars, okay, yeah. So, I mean, I stopped watching them. I mean, it's not like I took a moral position, I'm not going to watch them. I just actually do not care to see it. I mean, they're not any longer on my radar. Like if it was watch the Academy Awards or clip my fingernails, I'll clip my fingernails. I don't know, that's a pretty harsh thing to say.
Well, the Academy took on 600 people of color after a year when they were criticized for not having enough movies, nominations selected with people of color in them. And so now there are requirements to be considered. They have to have a certain number of people in color or themes in high positions, cast positions, or they won't be considered. And consequently, films are not getting made if they don't, because movie studios would like to vie for an Oscar-winning picture.
Well, I think there's two issues there. One, I think there are an enormously high number of really qualified and competent black actors, African-American actors and actresses. I think there are a high number of quality producers, people who know what they want to produce and can produce it, and would be successful regardless of what's going on. So I think we have to separate that out from the idea that they're putting these political, this is the CRT narrative, right? CRT, excuse me, critical race theory narrative, and they're imposing a Marxist standard on production. And we've heard the phrase, go woke, go broke. We've seen the Star Wars brand be just totally cratered. So what we really have to recognize is the people who've taken over Hollywood have taken it over, and they don't care about the value of their brands. They care about using them to propagandize until they destroy the label. And because these labels are a part of Americana, when we're totally destroyed, Americana is too destroyed. So I think that the people who are doing this understand they're destroying their own industry, and they're okay with that.
From an ideological perspective, or because they just want to continue fitting into the culture that pays their rent?
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of the people who are in charge of what's going on and making these standards that they're going to impose these things. And I think that's an ideological. I think they're deeply ideological and potentially past their own awareness that they are.
How about activist movements that criticize businesses for not having sufficient numbers of selected either employees or product towards a people of color orientation? Is this a form of Marxist control over American culture?
Well, again, it's one of those things you have to make some key distinctions. I do think there's such a thing as sexual harassment in office place. I do think there's places where you have racial discrimination. And I think that we can argue about where that bar should be drawn, but I think we all agree there is a bar. And I think that, sometimes it's higher and sometimes it's lower. So I would not want to be confused for saying I'm against, people who are genuine victims of racial discrimination from being able to seek justice for any type of purpose. But I think when you see people raiding stockbrokers' derivatives, stockbrokers' meetings and stuff like that to try to impose these standards, this has really little to do with racial equity. It has a lot to do with disrupting the corporate structure and undermining their capability. And of course, it will often be that when that happens, it won't be the most capable African-American man or woman who will get the job. It will be someone they've selected to be inside their operations to be a inside agent for what they want to do. I'm not going to say that's 100% of the time, but we see it enough so we understand that as a trend.
Mm-hmm. But there are protesters outside the Oscars today who are the same groups who used George Floyd as the pretext for public disruptions, and now they've taken on the Hamas Palestinian cause. What's at play here? What's going on?
Well, I'll tell you, in 2016, my organization, Unconstrained Analytics, put out a paper. It was about 40 pages long, explaining that there is a united front alliance between the Islamic movement, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood domestically, and the Marxist left. And they have been interactively interoperable so that the language of hate speech in Marxism equates with the language of Islamophobia in Islam. And they've been united as a united front effort. One of the things we were warning before these riots in 2020, 2020, is that a lot of the street activity in some of the cities would be undertaken for the left by CARE or by Islamic movement entities, and sure enough, we were able to show that did happen. And so right now, we can see that a lot of the Palestinian protests just put a different T-shirt on, and part of that same left is engaged in those protests. It's a cadre of people who show up for a lot of things. Some people are hired. I don't want to minimize this, but I mean, highly committed group of agitators who want to agitate. And I have to confess, I mean, if Hollywood is going to be a victim of that activity, I think they're just reaping what they sow. So.
But where's the counter to that movement, or is there a conservative, libertarian counter to this kind of Marxist pressure on, as you say, the institutions?
Well, I think there's growing awareness among people that things are drastically wrong. I think there's growing awareness that they're wrong in a way that's systematic and works against them. I think a lot of Americans are starting to realize they're being disenfranchised from their own institutions. And what you see is the Marxist narrative, or the constellation of narratives are constructed so that if you stand up for yourself, you're a racist. If you stand up for your this, you're a anti-LGBT, if you stand up for this. And what's starting to happen is you're not seeing, a guy who's got a secret set of, KKK sheets in their basement. You're talking about people who are ordinary Joes, just looking to do their job and trying to get their job done. And all of a sudden, now they're catching it, and people are seeing that. People are starting to see that people who are just good people. And by the way, I should point out, I think a lot of African Americans are seeing this, and they're saying, hey, wait a second here. We're for a lot of rebalancing some past ills, but we are not about this. And I think that there's a growing awakening across the board that that's happening. But the problem is, to raise a reaction, we have to first recognize that the left has what Lenin called a control of the commanding heights. And so I think we have to kind of understand that in a certain respect, we had a woman who was just giving a speech here who was a super competitive swimmer, in competition to break a record for women's, one of the women's swim races, and she got beat out by a man.
She got what?
She got beat in the race by a man who called, said she was a woman. And I think that we're just reaching a point where a gag reflex is starting to set in. At some point, the cat's got to cough up the fur ball. And I think that we're kind of building to that. But I'll be honest, I don't see any concerted resistance to it. Yeah. I don't think we're at that point right now where people are realizing they even have something to mobilize against. I think people just now understand in a transient kind of way, but a growing transient kind of way, that we're in a bad place. And as we reflect on it, we don't like it, and we have to figure out what to do. And there are no answers if you go on the internet. There are no, established media that gives them answers that explain them. In fact, they all seem to think that they're a disease that needs to be taken out.
That who's a disease?
That the average American citizen is a disease. That America is a disease. So.
Is this organized, engineered in some way? Is this a classic political science model?
Well, I'm not going to say it's political science because I'm not a fan of political science, but I will say I think it's political warfare, the Maoist insurgency model, and I think that exists completely independent of political science. I think political science is a disease which immobilizes our response systems, because we then have to create models of political model theories and then orient on the theory that hopefully addresses the problem. And I think we've been stuck in that kind of paralysis for 30, 40, 50 years. And I think that one of the main problems is the people who control those political science mechanisms are the same people who took over the institutions. So that we see somewhat the system closing in on the average American. And you could see it in all sorts of places. So for example, we know Herbert Marcuse in 1971 or 72 said, we're adopting the Long March strategy. Well, the Long March strategy is the Maoist insurgency model. And that's also called political warfare. And what did he say? We're going to create counter-state operations starting on the university campus. We're going to control the campus, then we're going to control the graduate programs, we're going to control who gets the graduate programs. Now we're 50 years later, and guess what? If you don't toe their political theory line, you won't get into a graduate school. Guess what? If you are and I don't want to get, this could become a racial thing very quickly, but if you're a native-born American who's been born and raised here and has, values that align with what this country's supposed to stand for, all of a sudden you're finding out that you don't have a chance of getting into a university graduate program in this country funded by your dollars, despite the fact that you have the grades, you have the temperament to be able to do that. So I think that there is an awareness that's going on that people are being shut out. But I think the question is can people become aware fast enough to override things? And that's the question.
But in what manner will people be able to override things?
Well,
do you trust the integrity of the elections?
I think in 2018, it was published in 2019, we wrote a big paper, me and Rich Higgins, called Re-Remembering the Misremembered Left, to lay the foundation for the fact that we need to re-remember the left because we don't know what it is, and the way we talk about it is misremembered. And we were funded by some groups in Washington, D.C. to do this. And when they found out we were going to use the word Marxism or communist, they just backed away. Well, we're not going to use that word. Well, we said we're going to use it. So we laid the foundation to how to understand the left. In October of 2019, I put out a paper called Warning on Racism, where we said the election that was a year out was going to be used by Marxists. Okay, we got very specific. Was to be used by Marxists to delegitimize the political process, undermining free elections in a constitutional system. It happened exactly that way. It went right down the line what we said was going to happen. Then in early May, I put out a paper called Raking from Minnesota that said when the violence starts this summer, it will start in Minnesota. And it started in Minnesota. So the answer to your question is everything we're seeing is systematic. There is nothing random about the random events that are happening. And so I think that, yes, there's absolutely design to what we're seeing. And that design is playing itself out, and I think people are starting to recognize it. Interesting about the forum today, everybody was zeroing in on problems, and it's like each person was feeling a different part of the same elephant, and people were talking about the same elephant. So I do think in the minds of people, things are starting to crystallize, and as things start to crystallize, people will be able to orient along that line of thinking to recognize that this is a threat, and actually it's a threat against me and my family and my way of life.
Is there an organized resistance to challenge, for instance, the vote from home, vote by mail, and all the vulnerabilities that haven't necessarily been rectified since 2022?
I think most of the resistance is social media generated, and I'm very skeptical about the quality of it. So I don't think there's a bonafide resistance to the actual problems, no. I think there's a lot of money being made on media discussions about how people want to prefer to talk about it that happens at the expense of actual investigations into election integrity issues, which is never discussed.
What do you anticipate for this election cycle? Now, from here we are in early March, and the southern border has not been plugged, despite what the president claimed in the State of the Union, that it's the Republicans who are stopping that.
Well, I think it's going to be a free show. I mean, I think people should be prepared for whatever happens. I do not find myself completely... I have severe problems in my own mind with the election integrity in this country. I think that the number one central issue, and I really don't want to go into details about it, but is a program called ERIC, and people like to talk about a lot of things with election integrity, but they don't talk about that. And I think until people understand it's ERIC, and that if you want to stop voter fraud in the large picture, you have to do away with mail-in voting, that we're not really serious about what's going on. And I think we're not serious about what's going on. So I like to remind people that every major election fraud issue happened in Republican districts where Republicans made sure that there was no positive finding.
You're referring to Georgia as an example?
I'm just referring generally. I'm keeping my comments generally. But yes, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I don't think they would bring a case if they knew it would win, but they would be willing to bring cases they know would lose.
Is there a mafia threat, that kind of a dominion mafia threat, that if someone breaches what that establishment wants, then they'd be in physical jeopardy?
I'm not really going to talk about Dominion because there's a lot of litigation going in there, but I do think that there is an overemphasis on things like Dominion, and I do think the way it's publicly discussed is not accurate, and I'll keep it to that. I think that again, ERIC, which is a program, I can't remember the acronym what it stands for, is the center of most of the election fraud issues, and it ends up being a lot more drier. I think some places, yes, we could see, some things happening this way. Other places, people just stuff ballots. But I always found it interesting that the level of unsuccessful prosecutions is, to me, sometimes not random. How's that? I just leave it at that. I know I'm being vague, and I apologize for that. But there's certain things I'm just, I cut myself off on talking about.
You're referring to that the Supreme Court wouldn't take on certain cases? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that we saw a whole lot of cases go forward that got dismissed where lawyers were strongly or heavily sanctioned, just short of being disbarred. Oh. And everybody focused on the political aspect of it, but the fact of the matter is they were disbarred for a reason. They were almost disbarred for a reason, and the reasons were genuine. And that extends beyond, that extends beyond what's happening. I think there are a lot of people who got a lot of media time, convincing people that some Supreme Court challenges are legitimate, and when they're dismissed because of lack of standing, well, that's a very easy thing to see. So I don't really want to go into detail about that because there's just stuff going on that I want to stay vague. But I'm completely skeptical about the public conservative media discussion of what's going on with election reform. Completely skeptical. Okay.
How are street demonstrations and the violence connected with them? What effect are they used to have on people's voting or socio-political conduct in terms of intimidation? Is there a precedent for this?
Well, I think it's true that in some places like Philadelphia, they've tried to intimidate people. I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't think people have refused to show up because of violence at voting places, except maybe in some limited areas. It might be a localized issue somewhere. I mean, to be honest, I'm just not familiar enough to be able to give you an answer.
But in terms of the demonstrations that are outside now, are they meant to influence people's attitudes towards opposing the protesters?
I'm not trying to understand your question. I think right now the protests are generating negative feedback for the protesters.
Oh, okay.
I think that these Palestinian marches are going into a feedback loop on them that's melting them down, and I think it's becoming quite severe. I think it quietly puts the Republicans in the bind, about playing both sides, but I think it's really openly fracturing the Democratic Party that wants to be very good relations on both sides of an issue that now is being split down the middle. So I think the more they're trying to generate awareness, and people are saying, oh, yeah, that's a very important thing, that both Los Angeles police and New York City police are arresting these people now. That's kind of an indicator that, even far left cities are saying, enough, and so I think that's, I'm not saying there's not going to be more protests, and I worry that they might get desperate and try to do desperate things, but I think that the reality of the situation is, people are tired of having their drive into work be stopped by some protester, and they're starting to make their local politicians know that I don't really care what their issue is. I want to get to work on time. And I think that that's now hitting or approaching critical mass, where even people who agree with these issues realize that if they want to get reelected, they better start doing their job. And so now I could be wrong on that. That's kind of just my state of thinking right now. But I kind of think that their hand is being overplayed, and I think it's causing counterproductive results. My understanding is I've seen polls that say that whereas the media would have you believe that the average American is becoming very anti-Israel, there's, like in these Palestinian marches, the support for Israel's gone up and way over 50%. And so you're actually seeing a negative feedback on the message they want to generate and stuff like that. So,
with as much expertise as you have on a global jihad and political Islam, and as much knowledge as you have about, and you're expert on communist revolutions, Marxism, the southern border seems to be filled with, among other asylum seekers, disproportionate amounts of Chinese military-aged men and Muslims from various extremist countries. For what purpose?
I just think that there is a committed effort by our national leadership. I call them the powers that be because I'm not always sure who the powers are that be, have made a decision that they're not going to protect the border, and they want this to happen. They want it to happen, and the violence you see against citizens by foreigners is something that Aristotle identified in his Politics as what tyrants do and oligarchies do when they want to intimidate their own citizens. This is as old as, leadership that is turning against its own public brings in people to intimidate the public, and I think that that's what we're seeing right now. And I think it's there's clear warning that people should start understanding things classically. The reason I point out Aristotle saying that is everybody thinks this is new and it's never happened. This is a model that's been played many, many times.
Yeah, but to what end? Would a leader want to intimidate their public through criminal activity in the streets?
Well, I think that to the extent we can show that there's a political warfare initiative against America, it's a destruction of the very idea of America. It's the very destruction of the very right for you to define yourself of a man if you're a man, or a woman if you're a woman. It's a total attack on your identity as a American, as a Christian or a Jew, as a man or a woman. This is a total attack, and I think that that's what we're seeing, and it follows classical Marxist form. It's a dialectical attack that results in the negation of the target that's identified for destruction.
Doesn't dialectical mean that you're conflating two opposing, or what one we consider?
One is always used to destroy the other, and I think that one of the things we'll be addressing one day is the total abuse of the word dialectic. For example, Hegel never said thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Never. And so does that model work for certain things? It absolutely does. But is that what it's about? It's something much larger than that. And in fact, it's so much larger, and at the center of gravity of a dialectical attack is not thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The center of that might be in today's world what Marxists call intersectionality. Okay, where you have a whole series of attacks on anything that identifies an American as an American, a man who's Jewish, woman who's Christian. Every one of those things will be attacked. And when you have a series of dialectical attacks that negate them, you have a population that's woke. Woke from what? Woke from their idea that they were somehow anything other than nothing. See what I'm saying? And that term woke comes right out of chapter 11 of Mao's Little Red Book on the masked line. So,
if people want to follow you, is Unconstrained Analytics still the best place?
Unconstrainedanalytics.org, and we have some papers we wrote about that. We've been a little bit quiet lately because we've had some internal disruptions, illnesses, and we've been busy working on some stuff, but I think we're going to become very active into the summer to start putting out some new content that's going to address just these questions.
How about social media?
I'm on Twitter to put stuff out, X to put stuff out.
Which name?
S. Coughlin. S_Coughlin at DC or something like that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Good. Okay. Steve Coughlin, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Take care.